I grew up knowing I was different, and I hated it. I was born with a cleft palate. And when I started to go to school, my classmates who were constantly teasing me made it clear to me how I must look to them. A little girl with a misshapen lip, crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and hollow and somewhat garbled speech. I couldn't even blow up a balloon without holding my nose. And when I bent over to get a drink of water, the water would spill out through my nose. When schoolmates asked, "What happened to your lip?" I'd tell them that I'd fallen as a baby and cut it on a piece of glass. Somehow, it seemed more acceptable to have suffered an accident than to have been born different. By the age of 7, I was convinced that no one outside of my family could ever love me or even like me. And then I entered the 2nd grade and Mrs. Leonard's class. I never knew her first name, just Mrs. Leonard. She was round and pretty and fragrant, with chubby arms and shining brown hair and warm dark eyes that smiled even on the rare occasions when her mouth did not. Everyone adored her. But no one came to love her more than I did, and for a very special reason. The time came for the annual hearing tests given at our school. I was barely able to hear anything out of the one ear, and I wasn't about to reveal to anyone else that I had any other faults. So I cheated. I learned to watch the other children and raise my hand when they did during the group testing. The whisper test, however, required a different kind of deception. Each child would go to the door of the classroom, turn sideways, close one ear with a finger, and the teacher would whisper something from her desk, which the child would then repeat back to the teacher. Then the same thing was done for the other ear. I had discovered in kindergarten that nobody checked to see how tightly the untested ear was being covered. So I merely pretended to block mine. As usual, I was last, but all through the testing I wondered what Mrs. Leonard might say to me. I knew from previous years she would whisper things like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" My turn came. I turned my bad ear to her, plugging the other up solidly with my finger, and I gently backed out the finger just enough to be able to hear. I waited. And then came the words that God had surely put into her mouth. 7 words that changed my life. Mrs. Leonard, the pretty, fragrant teacher I adored, said softly, "I wish you were my little girl." This is a story of a woman who watched. Mrs. Leonard looked past the obvious to see the beauty. She was looking for beauty, and she found it. Her words were simple, her words were honest, and her words changed a life. Brethren, our words have power. Our words give us the power to tear down, and more to my point, our words give us the power to build up. And with a bit of care, we too can change lives. All it takes is observing with an eye to find the good, and then sharing what we've seen. Today, brethren, I would like to talk about the value and the art of giving compliments and praise in our Christian lives. Before we launch into how we could change lives, we first need to take a look at just exactly what we're talking about. Sometimes a definition or two helps to have a sense as to what the parameters of the word is. So let's begin with a definition. For our first point, let's look to see what these 2 words, compliment and praise, mean. Let's take a look at the definition of compliment. This is from Wordnik on the internet. Wordnick says that a compliment is an expression of praise, admiration, or congratulation. And for the praise, the word praise, we look on Cambridge and we see that it defines it this way. Again, to express admiration or approval of the achievements or characteristics of a person or thing. We can also learn something from antonyms. I often like to see the antonym just to have a sense as to what both sides of the equation look like, to make sure that we can steer clear of the one. So the antonym for compliment is blame, censure, criticize, disapprove, and repel. So from the dictionary, we can know that we're talking about something that builds up the other person, something that expresses approval, respect, or admiration. And from the antonyms, we can know what we're not talking about. We're not talking about blame. We're not talking about undermining, getting in a dig. We're not talking about criticism. So when I talk about the art of complimenting in our Christian lives, we can know that we're going to be talking about something that's going to be building each other up. We'll be talking about how to show respect and indeed how to convey love to our sisters and to our brothers in God's church. Okay, so let's move on to point number 2. That's our definition. Let's move on to point number 2, and let's look at compliments as a means of expressing love. Compliments as a means of expressing love. We live in a critical world. All you have to do is go on social media, go on the news channels and watch the talking heads, and we just see blame. We need to be learning the opposite. We need to be learning love. And God drives home the importance of love when he gives us the 2 signs for how to find the church. The first sign is found in Exodus 31:13. No need to turn there. But he says that my Sabbaths, plural, are a sign between you and me. It's how God identifies his people, one way. But there's also another way found in John 13:35. Turn with me, please, to John 13:35. And we'll read how Christ says his church will be recognized as his own. There is a behavior that we are to be expressing. And when we do that, it is part of how we are identified. In John 13:35, Jesus says, "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another." So Christ tells us there are 2 ways that people will recognize us as the church, and one of them is if we're seen to be loving. And I suppose that we could argue that this is even the greater of the 2 signs, since God is defined as love. He himself is defined as love. But we're talking about compliments here. Why am I talking about love? Let's take a moment and let's look at the relationship between compliments and love. So what happens when we compliment another person? And remember that it's a compliment as an expression of praise, admiration, congratulations. It's also an expression of respect. So when we compliment another person, we're conveying something to them that is more than just the words we've uttered. We're conveying those sentiments as well. We're saying, in effect, I'm watching you. I'm watching you, and I'm looking for the good. This reminds me of what Mr. Armstrong's definition of love was. He used to say that love is the way of outgoing concern for others. So when we watch others, we're looking out, and that's with the direct intent. When we watch those around us with the intent to be able to find something about which to compliment, we're looking for something good. That is following Mr. Armstrong's definition of love, because it's an outward, an outgoing concern for another person. And you know, we've all seen the flip side too. Many of us have lived the flip side. At one point or another, we've all been scrutinized. We've all been in situations where we can just sense the disapproval. And anything we do, anytime we put our foot wrong or even right, that's a point against us. So we all know what that's like. Scrutinize is where you look deeply, you dig deep into a person and try to find every negative thing about a person. But what I'm talking about is the exact opposite. Just imagine someone is watching us. Imagine that someone is scrutinizing us, looking deep, digging deep into who and what we are, looking for the good, looking for what's perfect and beautiful in us. Not looking for the bad, but carefully watching, expending effort to find the very best in us. When we compliment each other, we're doing just that. And true compliments are an expression of love. When we shift from passively participating in each other's lives to actively seeking the good that exists in another person, we're expressing love. And there are many ways to express love, but few convey the extent to which our intent, our focus is on the subject of that love more than giving a compliment would. So a compliment, brethren, is an expression of love and acceptance. It's a unifying gesture because it breaks down all walls. It says, I'm not looking for the bad. I see good when I look out, and I see you. So in this message, we're going to talk about a way to express love that is frankly often overlooked. So that gives us a sense as to the value of compliments. They express love. Let's move on to our third point now. Our third point is how not to give a compliment. All right? How not to give a compliment. Look, it's important to give compliments, but it's also worth knowing how they can be abused to make sure that we don't stray. And there are two ways that compliments can be misused. Those two ways would be flattery and sycophancy, which is not an often heard word, but both of these are forms of manipulation, flattery and sycophancy. To illustrate, I'll read to you from Psych Central, the website Psych Central, what it says about flattery. It says that it can be hard to tell the difference between a compliment and flattery. A compliment is given to sincerely point out something positive with no expectation of gain. But flattery, contrary, is used disingenuously as a tool to gain emotional leverage. With flattery, there's often an expectation of getting something in return. For instance, someone who wants a raise, wants a promotion on the job, might regularly praise his manager's strengths and accomplishments, seeking to gain something. End quote. Okay, so it's wrong. It's a wrong way to compliment someone to employ flattery, where we have some kind of unstated expectation that I would get some kind of kickback from this. And I'm absolutely not advocating flattery. And as the quote said above, when we're talking about complimenting, it is with no expectation of gain. So let's look at sycophancy. What is the definition of sycophancy? A sycophant is a person who attempts to gain advantage by flattering influential people or behaving in a servile manner, especially that latter part, flattery in a servile manner. So anytime we compliment someone, when we don't have a genuine interest in the other person, where we have some kind of interest in gaining somehow from this exchange, that is not a compliment. That is flattery. Anytime our intention in complimenting has an ulterior motive, anytime we try to gain advantage, gain influence, that's not a compliment. That's flattery, it's sycophancy. So flattery and sycophancy are both forms of complimenting in a sense. However, it's with an intent to gain something from it. It's In fact, it's a lie of sorts, because I'm telling you one thing, but I'm really wanting something else. Let's turn to Proverbs. Proverbs 26:28. Proverbs 26:28. You know, for a compliment to be truly a compliment, it must be an expression, a genuine expression of love towards the other person. Remember what we read in John 13, that one of the signs of God's church is that we love one another. For our compliments to be part of that identifying sign of God's church, it must never be motivated by a desire to gain something, to get something back from it. Let's see what Solomon says about the fruit of flattery in verse 28, Proverbs 26:28. A lying tongue hates those that are afflicted by it. And as I said, flattery is a form of lie because it's deceitful. I'm telling you something nice so I can get something back. So flattery, a lying tongue hates those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth works ruin. A flattering mouth works ruin. So when someone with an eye toward gaining some kind of influence from that end, when someone compliments with an eye towards gaining influence, that's not an expression of love. It's actually an expression of hatred. The fruit of flattery is ruin. Let's look to the previous chapter, Proverbs 25. Proverbs 25:11. We'll know this one. I'm sure most of us could recite this by heart. Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. So by contrast, when we choose the right word, when we're careful with what we choose to say, when we choose to say it, what it does is it brings beauty. It expresses a unifying sentiment to the other person. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. We'll come back to that. Right now, we're talking about how not to compliment. So let's turn to 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 5. 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 5. The Apostle Paul was very aware of how he came across. He was aware of his approach to others. He was aware of how he used his words. And this is how Paul characterized his communication with others. In 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 5, he said, "For neither at any time used we flattering words." He did not flatter. This was a sincere man. Neither used we at any time flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness. Because flattery is a cloak of covetousness. I want something. I want to gain something. And Paul did not use compliments. He did not use praise as a means to covet, only to give. He spoke sincerely. He spoke honestly with no ulterior motive. So when we compliment people for the purpose of profiting, when we compliment to manipulate another person, and I would think that most of us have been in that situation where you think there's something icky about this. You feel like you are being manipulated. You don't want to accede to what they're saying. Anytime someone's trying to turn attitudes to their favor, it's no longer showing that we are Christ's disciples. That's showing that we're someone else's disciples. We're instead showing a kind of hatred, a disdain for others. So while we might say kind words to individuals, our intentions actually towards ourselves. Complimenting is a way of giving, not taking. It must never be used as a source of gain. Never must it be used materially or socially to gain. It must not be transactional. God will never bless that approach. So, how not to give a compliment? We should never compliment with an eye toward gaining favor or an attitude of motivation. Our attitude and motivation must always be outward, to buoy up the person we're complimenting. Okay, so that's how not to compliment. And attitude and motivation are all important as to why we compliment. But what goes into a good and a sincere compliment? Let's look at a couple of points now. The next couple points will be just that. So for our point number 4, we'll be looking at how we should compliment. And this point here is the heart and core of this message. And that is point number 4, that we need to watch and look for the good. We need to watch and look for the good, the heart and core of this message. So we might be wondering what we might say to compliment someone. We find the answer by watching. We watch our family, our friends, our sisters and our brothers. We watch. And by observing, we learn what we should say, how we should compliment. One of the advantages of looking for something good to say about someone is that it forces us to see the good in others. This is truly a very outward expression. Like I said, there's more to complimenting than just saying a couple nice words and then turning and walking away. One of the main advantages of looking for something good to say about someone is it illustrates where our heart is, but it's also, this is a good leadership skill. For any of you who are in leadership positions, a leader has to know the people he leads. He has to know their strengths. He has to know how to draw on those strengths. So a good leader is also practicing the same thing. He is watching the people he's leading. Philippians 4:8, please. Let's turn to Philippians 4:8. So what this involves is getting our heads off of our needs, off of our desires, and instead eyeing the other person with a deep desire to see the good in that person. And Paul details this very approach in Philippians 4, verse 8. He gives us a whole list of things here. He says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things." Thinking on these things means we're looking for these things. So what do we look for? Here in this congregation, I can think of a number of things that, just off the top of my head. Great song leaders, beautiful flowers, friendly demeanor. There's a lot of that here. Careful listening. We've seen that talking to someone just this week. Careful listening. Warm smiles. Wise advice. The number of things that we can notice about someone is infinite. But let's remember that Mrs. Leonard, she didn't even compliment on a single attribute of this young girl. She rather, after watching her for a year, she said something to her that was the summation of what she had learned about what this young girl was. And she instead stated her conclusion. "You are so beautiful." That is the unstated part. "I wish you were my little girl." And that changed a life. At the heart of all this watching, there's got to be love. There's got to be love for that person. We're looking to notice strengths, driven by this deep love. We all have weaknesses. Every last one of us does. And those tend to be what stick out the most. This takes effort to look for the good. And it trains our eye and our heart to look for it. So watching for and seeking the good in others is the beginning of any good compliment. However, as beneficial as compliments are, it would be easy to overdo it. I'm doing a whole sermon on the simple act of complimenting. You'd think that, hey, we should be complimenting it every time we see someone, shouldn't we? No. Well, you can, but my fifth point is the proper timing of our compliments. There is proper timing for our compliments. You see, if we over-compliment, we'll come across as gushing. We'll come across as trite. We'll lose credibility because people will think, oh, he's always gushing about something positive. So we need to make sure that our compliments are well-timed. Let's turn to Proverbs 25, verse 20. Proverbs 25, verse 20. I want to be clear, though, that while I'm talking about how we should time our compliments sparingly, we should give our compliments sparingly, Proverbs 25, verse 20, we must watch perpetually. I think it's a good practice to always be thinking, what positive thing could I say about you? Just think about all the people sitting around us. What could I say about you? We're watching constantly, even if I'm saying we compliment sparingly. So as we read here in the Proverbs, there are definitely times when we shouldn't try complimenting someone. Proverbs 25, verse 20, as he that takes away a garment in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre, which I think is soda. I think this just foams when you do this. Not a very pleasant sight. So is he that sings songs to an heavy heart. We have to have a sense as to what the person in front of us needs. So it's not, I want to do something grand. I need to know where your head and your heart is. There are no strict rules, but there is just a certain savvy that we have to have to know. Pardon me. That we have to. A certain savvy that we have to know when best to speak. So hold your place there in chapter 25. We'll be coming back in just a moment. In Isaiah 50, verse 4, just put it down in your notes, I'll read it to you. Isaiah 50, verse 4, the Lord God has given me the tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak a word in season to him that is weary. If we're talking to someone who is weary, we have to have a special consideration. That's a hard one to hit right, because we do want to encourage, but we have to know where the other person is coming from. So good words must be spoken in season, at a proper time. And timing is everything. We watch for admirable aspects in each other's character all the time. But we're also very careful as to when and how we share what we observe. I told you we'd hold your place in chapter 25, Proverbs 25:11. We read this a moment ago. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. Fitly spoken, well-timed. It fits in the moment. So we mustn't be insincere, and we mustn't gush. So we use our compliments judiciously, but we watch perpetually. Timing is everything. Let's move to our sixth point now. Point number 6, how our words can change the recipient of compliments. Okay? How our words can change the recipients of compliments. We might think that a compliment is just a nice fluffy thing that we say. It's here one moment and gone the next. However, we have no idea just how much impact a sincere compliment can produce. We have no idea. Let's go back to the story that we started with. Here's this little girl who feels she can be loved by no one, liked by no one except her family. But her teacher watched. She watched her over the course of this year, and she learned who she was. And she saw qualities in this little girl that made her say what she did, these words that changed her life. I wish you were my little girl. Now, our goal shouldn't be to try to change someone's life, because that could come across as being selfish. I want to leave my mark on this person so everyone knows I'm the one who turned that person around. We have to make sure that we have a sense of humility about the weight of our own words. And we'll let God do the heavy lifting with how our words do impact a person. Let's turn to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25. When we compliment for the right reason, we do create a sense of trust because we're pretty openly declaring, I'm not looking for the bad. I'm on your side. It creates an air of positivity and it instills courage in a person to carry on in a difficult life. So all of these create tangible and intangible changes in the person we're complimenting. It lifts them up. So that is, we can see there's something there that does benefit the person who's receiving it. But we can go a bit further. The author of Hebrews tells us how words can change our brother. So when we come to Hebrews 10:24, he says, and let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So as the day approaches, our expression of love will produce changes in the other person that will help him stand in the last days. And here I hope we're recognizing the precariousness of the times we are in right now. And we need to be practicing encouraging each other because we will face some pretty discouraging situations where the only bright spark is the love that they see in your eyes. So this will help, the change this produces is it helps our brother to stand in troubled times. Not only that, but we have to understand that observing each other so as to praise them absolutely is a way to provoke to love. We are fulfilling verse 24. We're provoking to love. So when we choose to seek out the best in another and share what we find, we change that recipient. We change him by building his trust in us, for one. We build courage in him. And we all perform better in a positive environment. We create that positive environment, and we also instill courage. So those are ways that our choosing to watch and utter a properly timed compliment, how that builds someone up, the positiveness that builds in the other person. So that naturally begs the question, how do we profit when we compliment someone? How do we profit when we compliment someone? Let's turn to Philippians 2:3. Philippians 2:3. So right now we'll be looking at point number 7. Let's look at how praising others, how complimenting others benefits the person giving the compliment. Philippians 2:3. We see one immediate benefit here. Let nothing be done, Philippians 2 verse 3. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Okay, so we esteem others better than ourselves. All right, that's pretty clear. Pretty clear from the verse here. But how does that benefit us? It benefits us because it gets us focusing outward. And when our focus is outward, it creates in us, echoing this verse here, it creates in us a lowliness of mind. In short, looking for the best in others creates humility in us. It teaches us humility, how to see the best in others. Let's turn to, we're spending a lot of time in Proverbs 25. Proverbs 25, verse 27 now. Proverbs 25, verse 27. Here in the Proverbs is another way that we gain personally when we seek praise from others. This one's not as straightforward, so I'll explain. Proverbs 25, verse 27. It is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory. How do I get anything out of that for us? If we seek our own glory, God says that's not glory. So doesn't it figure that if we seek someone else's glory, that is glory for us? When we give to others, we gain. When we give to others, we get glory back. Let's turn to Luke 6:38. Luke 6:38. God's way goes completely contrary to the way that we grew up seeing all around us, the way that we see operating this world. The more we give, the more we have. So we make a concerted effort to observe and to see the good in others, and then we share what we've observed with them in the form of a compliment, which in turn lifts up our sister or our brother. And by God's logic, all we've just given will come right back to us. Luke 6:38, he says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you meet." Every time you look at your sister or your brother and you say, "I like what I'm seeing," and you share that, those little nuggets of joy that you give do come back. For with the same measure that you meet, with all it shall be measured to you again. So giving glory, giving praise, giving compliments will be measured back to us. We certainly can't outgive God, but it's fun to try. When we expend the effort to buoy up our sisters and brothers, we all reap joy. Let's come down to our point number 8 now. Point number 8. You see, we could spend all day talking about our need to lift each other up through compliments and praise. However, there's one way where we could spoil all the benefits of a compliment. And that one way is if someone gives us a compliment and we reject it. If we brush it off. When we do this, we can actually end up discouraging the person who gives us the compliment. So let's briefly look at how we accept a compliment. Now, not all of us feel comfortable receiving praise from someone. It can make us feel awkward. Sometimes we just don't want the spotlight on us. It can feel unwarranted. We might not feel comfortable just in general when someone turns that light on us. That's okay. But just because we feel that discomfort, I mean, look, it makes it easy for us to just want to brush it off and say, no. All praise goes to God. I didn't do anything special. And perhaps we'd feel that we'd be being proud if we accepted it. Or, like I said a moment ago, maybe we just feel it's not warranted. I didn't do anything special. But when we deflect or reject a compliment, it sets us up for a sort of conflict. Because the one person is trying to say, I'm taking special care. I've been watching you with an eye to see the best in you. And he says what he says. The person says, you're all wrong. I don't want it. When the person immediately rejects that message, he's rejecting the person and the effort and the love and the care he's expending. So we've just seen that there are benefits to the giver of the compliment and the receiver of the compliment, and all of that goes down the drain when we reject a compliment. You know, my wife has a saying that's spot on. It's kind of cute, but we'd all do well to implement it. It goes this way. The correct way to receive a compliment is to say, thank you, and a blush is optional. Thank you. There's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Unless the person complimenting us is being dishonest, unless the person complimenting us is seeking gain, is flattering, somehow trying to manipulate us, the correct way to receive a compliment, whether we feel it's merited or not, is to always graciously say, thank you. And if we wish, we may blush. When our brother or sister compliments us, it's another way of saying, I love you. And we might think we're only rejecting the compliment, but it's more than that. We're rejecting their expression of love. So when we receive a compliment, unless we suspect that there's some ulterior motive behind it, it's best just to say Thank you. Now for my final point. Let's shift our focus to a very special circumstance. A great many of us are parents, and some of us are managers or leaders of some sort. When we're in such positions, compliments can serve as a powerful tool to shape behavior. I'm not talking about flattery, nor am I talking about any other form of manipulation. But what I am talking about is praise in lieu of correction. For our point number 9, let's take a look at how compliments can be used to exhort and shape our followers. How compliments can be used to exhort and shape our followers. I think here a picture is worth 1,000 words. Let's look to see how the Apostle Paul used praise and compliments to shape his congregation's behavior. While we read this, let's think about our situation on the job or in our families where we see a behavior that we want to modify and see if maybe this is the proper way of going about it. So let's turn to Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. You see, exhortative compliments can be like correction because their aim is to change behavior, to shape behavior. In that they praise the desired behavior, something positive, rather than focusing on the negative. You might not want this negative behavior, so you see, if they just do this, that will replace this other negative behavior. So let's see how Paul uses this technique. Philippians 2:12. Wherefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, so there is a compliment, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. Here's the exhortation: work out your own salvation with fear and with trembling. Paul wanted to exhort the Philippians to take charge of their own salvation. You might say he was correcting them. But notice how he states it. He states it in a very positive light. You're already doing this. I just want to see you do it more. 2 Corinthians 8:7. 2 Corinthians 8:7. And here in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, again, Paul wanted to change their behavior, to encourage them to help out with a collection that he was taking up, that he was organizing to be sent to Jerusalem. There was a famine, they were needy. So here he's encouraging them to save up for this collection. And notice how lovingly he does this. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 7. Therefore, as you abound in everything, in faith, notice this list here, in faith and utterance and knowledge and in all diligence and in your love to see us, see that you abound in this grace also. The grace he's referring to is this collection for Jerusalem. But notice how much he focuses on these positive traits of the Corinthians. That's a whole list of points that he has been watching and observed. Paul knew his congregations. How many times does he say, greet so-and-so by name? A whole list of people by name. He knew his congregations, and he knew these traits were in the Corinthians. And remember, this is also the Corinthian church with all its problems. And what did he do? He praised them to shape behavior. He wasn't cajoling, but he encouraged them. So Paul used praise to shape his followers. He wasn't insincere. He wasn't manipulative. He wasn't coercive. He just praised them. He was shaping behavior with praise. Let's look at two more examples of this, both in 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians. Turn with me to 1 Thessalonians 4. We'll read verses 9 and 10. 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 9 and 10. We see here that Paul had a very distinct result that he wanted to evoke in the Thessalonians. He wanted them all to love all the more. And I don't think he was being ethereal about this. He had a specific target he wanted from them. So let's read 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 9 and 10. But As touching brotherly love, you need not that I write to you, for you yourselves are taught of God to love one another. And indeed, you do it. He's saying, you are already doing this toward the brethren, which are in Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that you increase more and more. He's encouraging them to do exactly what I'm encouraging you to do, to edify each other. First, he praises them for what he sees in them, and then he tells them, do it even more. We could see this sermon as the same way. I see love in this congregation. Let's do it even more. Let's do it even more. Let's turn to the next chapter. 1 Thessalonians 5:11. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 11. Paul is talking about the end time here. It's going to come as a thief in the night, that we're not doomed by God's wrath, but destined to salvation. And then finally he tells us this in verse 11. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 11. He says, wherefore comfort yourselves together. He knows the times are tough. So he says, what does he say? And edify one another, even as also you do. We see this throughout Paul's writings. The man watched his congregations. He knew them like the back of his hand. He knew that they were already comforting and edifying each other. But he's trying to shape their behavior by praising what he wants to see more of. He sees it's there already. In effect, he's correcting them. But this is the most beautiful kind of correction. And there are many times where we can use praise, targeted praise, in lieu of correction. Not in every case, but there are many times where we can use it as a very positive way to obtain the kind of behavior we're wanting. I can count at least 7 times that the Apostle Paul used this, twice that Peter used this, and once that the author of Hebrews, whether it's Paul or someone else, used. So if we're in this special situation where we have people who are following us, be it children, employees, whatever it happens to be, let's remember the power of praise to encourage to do something we want to see more of. Let's start to wrap this up now. Our little second-grade girl with a misshapen lip and cleft palate could only see herself as others saw her, as an object of ridicule. But her teacher saw something else. She watched this little girl, and she knew what was in that little girl's heart. And she saw something that was beautiful. And she didn't share what she saw, she shared what she concluded. And she said, I wish you were my little girl. It was with those words that she did indeed change a life. We won't all transform someone's life with our words, but we will all have the power to give each other courage to push on. We have the power to build bonds of love and commitment between us. We have the power to build up those who are battered, and there are people in this congregation who feel battered. And it all starts by watching, by looking for the good in each other, looking for the good, and then at the right moment, utter the exact words that that person needs to hear, what we have observed in that person's heart. If there's one thing I'd hope this message would or could instill in us, the one thing I would want is for us to all scrutinize each other. I say scrutinize because we tend to think of digging deep but to find something bad. But I'm saying let's scrutinize, let's dig deep to find something good. Let's look for the good. Let's expend effort looking for the good in each other and look for the best in each other. When we do this, we build each other up. We build stronger bonds between us. It's part of provoking each other to love. here at the end of this age. That's what's going to help us to stand as things start getting really bad. And as the Apostle John said, it's how people will know we're God's church. In closing, I'd like to reread those very words from John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another.